Okay, guys, welcome back. We are doing section 7, but we are going to stop after the slide on the election of 1932. This is an incredibly short day. Yesterday was longer. The video on notes section 6 was a half hour. My bad, it got away from me. This one will be significantly shorter because we're only doing 3 slides, a couple really quick videos, and then your worksheet tonight is FDR's inaugural address, which is amazing. And there is another video separate for that worksheet. Tomorrow we'll finish section 7 of the notes. So be happy, today's a short day. It's all about balance, right? We are going to get right to it so that this doesn't turn into another half-hour long video. So yesterday we talked about Hoover and his response to the depression that had quickly come upon the nation, beginning with that turning point. Don't forget, it's a turning point of the stock market crash in 1929, that Black Tuesday that changed the path of the nation from being the prosperous country that we were in that post-war boom of the 1920s to an absolute decline into a depression beginning on that day in October of 1929. So Hoover's beginning response is, let the people fix it themselves. Let the rich spend and we'll give a little money to the top and hopefully it'll work its way down. We also saw Hoover fall flat on his face yesterday in how he handled the bonus army. That was really bad. So today we're going to start to take a step in a different direction, which is why this section is called a new approach. It is something completely different than we had seen from any of the Republican presidents, Hoover, Coolidge, Harding of the 1920s, who were very pro-business, hands-off government. I have been waiting for this day all year. Franklin Delano Roosevelt. We are here. We are excited. This is the best president. I'm not even going to hide my extreme bias anymore. Franklin Roosevelt is the 5th cousin of, he's not my second favorite, but he's definitely in my top 5, of Theodore Roosevelt, good old Teddy. He is going to enter politics in 1910 as a senator of New York. In 1913, President Wilson is going to name FDR his Assistant Secretary of the U.S. Navy. This is going to be a post that he holds for 7 years. So he rode that post out in World War I all the way up until he goes to run for a different position. So Franklin Roosevelt switches what his role in the government is going to be when he chooses to run for governor of New York in 1928. Now, he becomes governor of New York, and this is huge, 1928, year before the stock market crashes. He is going to be the governor when the stock market crashes. The way that he handles this is in a very liberal manner. What the heck do I mean by liberal manner? I mean that he takes the government and says, we are going to fix these problems. We are going to get involved. The government is going to provide relief to the people in the form of aid. He says we are going to be very progressive. The government is going to be very hands-on. We are going to solve the social problems of this depression. And the governor of New York had all eyes on him because that's where the stock market is. That's where the banks start to fail first. That's where you see unemployment hit the highest first, because that was the hub of our economy in New York City. So the way that Roosevelt handles this is taken notice to by the people of the United States. They love it. which is going to come into play very, very quickly. Hoover. I hate to really take us from a high point down to a low point, but Hoover is going to see that the Hoover Dam worked. It put money in the hands of the people. It gave us a little project to do, and he's going to try to run with that idea. He creates the Reconstruction Finance Corporation in 1932. What he did here was he allocated or set aside $500 million in loans to banks, corporations, and state governments. So he says, okay, the federal government is going to set aside money for loans to people that need it the most. This is also going to fund some projects that mimic what he did with the Hoover Dam, hiring people to build something. And two examples of this are the Golden Gate Bridge and the Los Angeles aqueducts. So we are seeing some of these public works projects also being funded by the federal government. How does that help? You're giving people jobs. When people have jobs, they make money. When they make money, hopefully they spend that money. So he starts to catch on at the end of his presidency, because he comes in 1928, in how this problem should be fixed. But he doesn't take that step, one giant leap forward, which the country needed. He doesn't extend federal aid to individuals. So he's not sending checks like the government is supposed to be doing very soon for us right now. He doesn't send checks to the individual. He's still giving it to these big corporations up at the top, and in hoping that it will trickle down to the people. That's not working. We need to get checks, put them in the hands of the average American citizen, and hope that they will spend. But what Hoover says is, he says if we give people money, it's going to create a dependency of the people on the government, which he didn't want to do. He also is going to argue that it stops innovation and invention. If we just pay people, it makes them lazy. They don't want to work anymore. Well, we won't get into my opinion on it because it doesn't matter. But this had never been done in the past, is his argument. We've seen depressions, maybe not this bad, but we've seen them, and the economy repaired itself. Why should we do anything different? He couldn't see that the Great Depression was different. It was worse than any depression we had seen before. The economy was not just going to fix itself. And that's going to create a big problem for the people when it comes to supporting Hoover or not. Before we do the last slide of the day, we've got a little video. I love drawn history, just in case you can't tell. This is about a minute long, so I won't torture you too long.
Today, we recount the tragic tale of Herbert Hoover, the 31st President of the United States. Originally a mining engineer working in such far-flung places as Australia and China, he was made the head of the U.S. Food Administration during World War I and served as America's Secretary of Commerce to great success. Unfortunately, Hoover and his presidency became two of the many victims of the Wall Street crash of 1929. He tried to mitigate the effects of the Depression with large-scale public works projects, such as his namesake dam, and drastically increasing taxes. Neither worked, the Depression continued, and the public blamed Hoover. In fact, the squalid makeshift shantytowns that sprang up to house the homeless across the U.S. became known as Hoovervilles. And that was just the beginning. His political rivals christened Hoover blankets, Hoover flags, and Hoover wagons. Hoover's 1932 re-election campaign was met with angry, riotous crowds that threw eggs and rotten meat at him. One man even tried to assassinate him with dynamite. Needless to say, Hoover didn't win a second term, losing to eventual four-time President Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
So you can see that the people really proved that they did not like Hoover when it came to the election, and they're going to put it on paper in the voting booth in the election of 1932. So we are going to have Herbert Hoover face off against FDR. Hoover the Republican, Roosevelt the Democrat. So when Roosevelt runs, he promises, and I'm getting goosebumps just saying this because it's so great, he promises a new deal for the American people. He says, we are going to fix this new problem with new solutions because that's the only way for us to get out of it. And prohibition, remember the 18th Amendment that said you could not manufacture, sell, or make alcohol? He says, I'm going to repeal that. I'm going to guess that that gave his numbers a pretty big boost because the people hated prohibition. Hoover, who's running for the Republican Party, he doesn't have anything in his favor. The bonus army, the using of gas, fire, and just brutality against veterans who were asking for help from the government, money that they were promised. How he handles the bonus army really just takes down the numbers. The slow progress that he was making trying to pull the country out of this depression, it doesn't work, and the people see that. They say, we need change. We can't keep doing what's always been done because this is not what has always happened. This is something different. Roosevelt is going to win with 58% of the popular vote and 89% of the electoral vote. That is crazy numbers. If you can see over there, he gets 472 out of the 500 and, hold on, my math, not that great. But he gets 472 electoral votes. And with this, he wins the presidency and is able to come in as the new president. Americans make a statement with the voting in of FDR because they say he's new, it's a new party, he's going to bring change, this change is good, we want to have change, we need to have change, and with this, we see a new tide for the United States. Now, tomorrow we are going to get into everything FDR, but I want to get us prepped and ready for it. We are only going to watch about 2 minutes of this, and then we are done for the day.
FDR came from an aristocratic family. He was the cousin of Teddy Roosevelt. He was to the manor born, but he was also a man of the people.
Franklin Delano Roosevelt was born in Hyde Park, New York, on January 30th, 1882. He was an only child. In 1900, Roosevelt entered Harvard University, where he became romantically involved with his fifth cousin.
Roosevelt had met Eleanor Roosevelt when they were children, and then they reconnected when he was a student at Harvard. They married quite young, and they had 5 children in a short amount of time.
FDR entered public service by running for and winning the New York State Senate seat in 1910. Later, President Wilson appointed him Assistant Secretary of the Navy.
In 1920, Roosevelt ran for vice president on the Democratic ticket. It was a devastating loss, one of the biggest landslides in history. In 1921, at age 39, FDR contracted polio, and it forever changed his life.
He had been vigorous as John F. Kennedy and being a great athlete, and suddenly he couldn't do any of that.
A lot of people were not aware of just how paralyzed he was. They knew that he had leg difficulties, but that he couldn't walk at all because there were no pictures of him, in that wheelchair.
In 1932, Roosevelt was elected President of the United States. The country was in the midst of the worst economic depression it had ever seen. Within his first 100 days in office, Roosevelt began the New Deal, a series of economic programs focused on relief, recovery, and reform.
Financial markets were in free fall. FDR came into office and said, we're going to have to deal with this. He said, we have nothing to fear but fear itself. FDR knew exactly when to give voice to the American people, give them hope. And he had the genius of doing these radio fireside chats.
Okay, we are going to start there because tomorrow we are going to pick up with the rest of this section, and we'll get right back to FDR. So for today, that is it. Don't forget to do the FDR inaugural address, and there is another video for that. And as always, any questions, let me know.